Okay, so just to kind of give you a quick overview of how the webinar is going to be run, after my very quick intro, I'm going to hand over to Kayla de Freitas. Kayla is a PhD student in the Louis Hume Wildfire Centre, one of the members of Diverse K, and she's currently in Guyana. And going to be chairing the session. So she'll tell us a little bit more about the objectives of the webinar, introduce us to everybody, and then kicks things off. I think that's all I had to say, wasn't it, Kayla? Was it anything else? I don't think so. No. So, okay, I'm going to then hand over to Kayla. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jay. Can everyone hear me? Yeah? Okay, good. So as Jay mentioned, my name is Kayla de Freitas. I'm Jay's PhD and Daniele's PhD student. And with me here we have Gavin Winter. He's from Ishalton Village, representing the South Rupununi District Council. Tessa Kennedy from Shulanat, representing South Rupununi Conservation Society. We also have Angel Bird with us from Sawarwa, representing the South Rupununi District Council and the South Rupununi Conservation Society. So I'm just going to introduce a little bit about the aims of the webinar right now, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organizations. And later on, as Gavin, Angel, and Tessa are presenting, they're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves and what they do as well. So basically, there's just three broad aims. The first aim is this webinar basically to generate a discussion between Indigenous researchers or Indigenous peoples who have been involved in research with scientists who are interested in working with Indigenous peoples, specifically, for example, paleoecological scientists who may not have this experience of working directly with Indigenous peoples. The second aim is to basically create a guideline for those types of researchers seeking to engage with Indigenous peoples based on sort of feedback from this discussion and any further webinars or discussions that happen. So kind of create a guideline of how to engage, how to share data, how to properly and appropriately sort of compensate or recognize Indigenous contribution to research. And the third sort of objective is also to support the SRDC by sharing the outcomes from this meeting in terms of creating their own protocols for creating a guideline for working with researchers and sharing data. So the South Rupununi District Council is an Indigenous grassroots organization, and it's an umbrella organization for 21 communities in the South Rupununi. The executive of that organization is made up of the Tushaus and councillors from the communities themselves. And they hold meetings 3 times a year, and the exec also meets to discuss issues relating to the territory in the South Rupununi. Basically, they aim to protect the territory and also lobby for land security. But Gavin and Angel will talk a little bit more about the specific activities that SRDC is involved in through talking about their research as well. And the South Rupununi Conservation Society is a grassroots conservation group kind of based with community-based conservation. They started off with looking at conserving or protecting a very endangered bird called the red siskin, but later the mandate sort of grew into biodiversity protection, habitat protection, but also recognizing the role of traditional knowledge and management, so also promoting language and traditional skills and environmental awareness and education in communities as well. So that's just a little bit about us and about the aims of the webinar. Jay, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't think so. I think you've done a good summary. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I guess we could jump straight in. Yeah.
This is just intro.
Yeah, intro. So they're going to introduce themselves a little bit more, and then we're going to go into the presentations.
Hello, everyone. Good morning from the Rupununi. My name is Gavin Winter, as Kayla mentioned. I'm presently working with the SRDC as monitoring coordinator. The monitoring stemmed out of the management plan of the Wapshanas, which we will talk about more. So we do field trips into mining areas, the border between Brazil and any environmental threat that we find happening within our territory. We now using satellite imagery with help from partners. So if we find something is happening out in the territory, the monitors will have to go out to check out what's happening out there in the forests, especially. These are distant areas from villages, so people don't have a day-to-day knowing what's happening in the forest itself. I will talk more about it. I'll give Tessa a chance to introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tessa Kennedy. I'm from Shilla Village, a proud Bukushi woman. I'm currently working with SRCS, implementing their the curriculum in schools and the environmental education. And also work along with Kayla to help her with her research, doing her interviews. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a Wapshana guy from a village called Sawario. My name is Johnny. I work with SRDC as a monitor as well, along with Gavin. I focus really on the border because of the threats that are coming into our territory. So we get information and give it to the shows to deal with those issues. I also work with another wildlife that is under the umbrella of the SRDC, Wapsan Wildlife Committee. I sit as a committee member. So I also work with the Cultural Heritage Project at this moment. So next week I'll be heading out to two other villages to south to continue that work. I'm currently the vice president of the SRCS, and I'm a ranger of that organization as well. So I'm like splitting myself in both sides for the SRDC and for SRCS. And I'm going to speak more about what the works that we do or I do later on. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. So this is just a little introduction about what these guys are currently doing or involved in, and we're gonna move now into talking a little bit about what research they've been involved in the past. Sorry about the ringing, as well as their experiences working with researchers. So we've got three different types of stories, I guess, or explanations about what their experiences. So we hope you enjoy it, and we look forward to the discussion after. So we're gonna start off with Gavin here.
Okay. Thank you, Kayla. In the past, I have mostly worked with social scientists, anthropologists mainly. The project that we were involved in directly was out of a 10C, the Convention on Biological Diversity. Article 10C had a case study that they wanted to find out what is customary use of biological diversity and traditional practices of indigenous peoples. So out of that convention, we were involved in a research. The research, before we go out, we had to do a training. We were trained in basic research skills, how to conduct interviews, how to hold public meetings, how to record data using notebooks, recordings, videos. It was a series of activities that the SRDC was taking on, which we did a mapping before with guides and mappers. So they went out checking out how the distance that people would go to get resources under hunting, gathering, and fishing. So to tell that story, TNC was a document later on created to give more meaning to these areas that the mappers had mapped out. Also, before the actual research, the team had to develop a kind of a protocol that we even as Wapshan people had to abide by when visiting these communities as well. So the skills that we were trained in, like I said before, how to conduct an interview mainly, and how to cross-reference or triangulate information that you're getting from the research itself, and then a bit of analyzing skills when you finish collecting your data, because we had to write up our findings in the end to present to the scientist that was assisting us. I also shared this research by providing better understanding of traditional knowledge and customary management practices that we undergo from a day-to-day living, because it appears sometimes that the way Wapshana live, there are no written rules or no written customary laws of how things should happen. So other people could possibly make the mistake and say that we are confusing people, maybe the way we do things. So understanding all of this is something that we had to look at. My experience with the research had a lot to do with the reaction from the people we work with on the ground itself, right? So even as a Wapshana person, it was an awakening for me after doing this research more, because it gave me an opportunity to understand the more deeper meaning between land and culture and the environment itself. So from that research, we were able to understand the connection between the land and the forests and the water and the people, even the skies even. So, it was a way of how to see how these things are connected. Because if you don't know your language, or if you don't know the language, you don't have an idea what the environment is. So knowing your language will give you an understanding of how you should take care of the environment, how you should use the resources of the land. Also, part of this study, we did a desk-based legal analysis to understand customary law and how that is protected, or if not, by national law and international law. So we had lawyers helping us understand that as well. Some lessons we learned through the research was that it could not deal with certain topics properly, entirely. For example, the research that we didn't look at cultural heritage in depth, like, so we didn't look at the role of the shamanic in our territory, especially with shamanic leaders. And this is when we realized that time was a constraint to our research. Lawyers looking at national laws here in Guyana to see what or how they protect or strengthen customary laws, and to see if what national laws have in for us as against international laws. So from the research as well, we were able to understand more about the governance of our leadership as well, and how management in itself of the resources in our territory is organized. Some lessons we learned through the research was that it could not deal with certain topics, like I said before. For example, specific understanding of cultural heritage. And it is only now that we have someone helping us with that specific topic in our villages back home, which I think Angel will give you more about that. We'll talk more about that. So, like I was saying before, whilst we were going out doing the research, there were certain conflicts that communities presented to us as researchers, and we were not prepared to deal with these conflicts regarding resource use, obviously. So this is when the idea came up that we needed to do a much more in-depth paper on how we will tackle or resolve some of these conflicts over resources. And out of that research, we learned that some of these conflicts came about when so when so we find that when communities learn where their individual titles ended, this is when the idea of border or boundaries came about. So obviously now they started to look at their little title as their own. And when your neighbor village come over into your title, they feel that now you were intruding on their lands. But the process that the Amrinian Act have now, it allow for extension over the same lands that the ancestors had presented before. So it is a process that we are following now. We also have agreed agreements, inter-community agreements. We had to go to each village to identify these areas and come up with shared boundary agreements between communities. So even if you have a boundary, it doesn't mean you're not allowed to go over the other side to use or to share the resources from both villages. So we have that as a way of how we move forward with these shared resource areas as well. There were some negative experiences that we encountered during the research. One was, well, I should talk about the positive first, Vera, is that out of the research, we were able to at least map out like common goals of a people where we saw ourselves going into the future, kind of. So having security to these lands, having secured land titles to the entire Wapshan claim itself, it was clear coming out from most of the villages that this was a priority for us. Right? So having a secured land claim is something that came out of this research. Because it was dealing with land and land tenure, all these things, we encountered some political tensions within some of our communities, not all, but these were mainly from people who were, influenced by national politics and these kind of things. So out of that research as well, we realized that we had to kind of form a protocol regarding data or any information coming out of communities. So SRDC is the main body that will have to deal with how they share and protect data in the future. Because before then, we didn't have a way of how we protect or how we deal with data, or how we share data in the past. So now the SRDC have moved towards training younger people as data managers. So they take data from our field trips, clean it up, and analyze them, and store them, and have them to see those data, rather than going to anybody from the SRDC to ask for data. So we have adopted now a protocol of how you access data. Some benefits that came out of the research based on supporting Indigenous rights. Like I said before, they were passionate about having, again, the land claim resolved. They keep strengthening the leaders. They keep advising the leaders that you need to go behind, you need to pressure the government and keep going behind the government to get the government recognize the lands, right? Because again, having security to the lands means your language is secured, your practices are secured, all your customs are more kind of secured. So it's not just the land that we were looking at. Everything, like I said, is connected to one another. So out of this research, we now have, I think, 3 pilot schools doing Wapshana as part of their curriculum to teach to use Wapshana as a bilingual learning tool. So that was an outcome of that research as well. From this research, we had to present these findings to a convention on COP9, I think it was. So from there, we were able to kind of network and get SRDC to be more recognized internationally. There, we're able to meet more people or more organizations. Our maps are now, we have a mapping unit now that have latest mapping softwares. These data technicians are now trained how to use these applications. We're able to create maps for every part of the territory. Going ahead with headwaters protection. So that is a mapping technique itself. So we're able to map out certain rivers and or watersheds within our forest areas. Our monitoring data was able to feed directly into one of the UN bodies, UNDRIP, as regarding the issue of mining in Marudi back at home. So we were able to feed into that and have them adopt a part for specifically for Guyana to deal with. So the monitoring that I'm directly working now is a way of how give us a chance to be physically out there on the ground itself from a monitoring approach. So the monitoring is the eye and the ears of the SRDs. Some recommendations I would like provide to scientists interested in working with indigenous communities, not only in Wapshana area, but maybe in Guyana in general, or indigenous peoples anywhere or any part of this world, is that spend quality time with the people or with the community itself. That is something that we found that they just, although we have burning issues, it's about trust. You have to know who you're relating your information to. Unless you conduct your way in a well manner, that interviewee will not give you all the information that you're looking for, right? And because of customary law, that is something that you should consider before visiting any indigenous family, especially because when you're interviewing, you're going to the home of a particular person. So they're always busy, of course. So you have to take time to get that person's attention, because if you turn up when the person is weeding his yard or his farm or is going fishing, you have to make the time to go behind that person, so that you have maximum time from that person. While he's reading, you can get information from them, or while he's doing something, so that he don't lose his time, but you gain something from him as well. The approach that the SRDC took was always a two-way approach. The researcher is always looking for something for himself, but then we as a community, or the Wapishana people, always looking for a way of how they are going to face to these challenges as well, right? So documenting, getting documents in order, and so that we could present this as evidence to the government. Maybe one day when, if we come to that. So we always look in a way of how we can help ourselves as well. So that is something that we learn. Third, so the results, not because I say blue, you will take it for gospel. So it means, as a researcher, before you publish or give out your findings to anyone else, you're always invited to come back and validate your findings, right? Either at a community meeting, and everybody see what you're recorded and what you're going to say about everybody, so they can finally agree and validate and say, yes, it is true and valid, and they can give you your blessing to go and share that or publish that at the end. Lastly, is especially here at home, we encourage you to read other documents as related to Wapishana across Brazil, because we have Wapishanas in Brazil, and they have loads of other literature document, more than the Wapishanas in Guyana. So cross-referencing those kind of information would give you a better argument, or give you a better paper to present, I believe. And not only in Brazil, but maybe other languages, you might have documents about indigenous people, like French, Spanish. So it would be good to check out other documents already presented at other learning institutions, so that you can make a stronger argument, not for yourself, like I said before, but for people in general. Yes, so with that, I will conclude my presentation here. Thank you for listening. If there's any question, I'm sure we'll deal with that after.
Thanks, Gavin. Thank you so much. Jay, I don't know if you want to jump into the discussion now, or should we should just go through all the presentations, yeah?
Yeah, I think it would be good to go through the presentations and then do questions at the end. And I did say in the chat before, but I encourage people to start putting questions in the chat if they have any, and so that I can start collating them.
Yeah, Jay is going to be monitoring the questions you put in the chat. So as things come in, you can put that in. So with that, I'm just going to say thank you very much for that, Gavin, and I'm going to hand over to Tessa now. Moving closer to the computer.
Hello, everyone again. I'm Tessa Kennedy. Since as a teenager, I started working with researchers. My first encounter was with the Project Campana. Yes, when the government was now starting their the Red Plus project in Guyana. but they starting the development low carbon development strategy. Then we're trying to understand how carbon works in the soil and in the forest and stuff like that. We're collecting samples every month and sending them to Latin to be analyzed, I think, further out. From that, I was able to, of course, we had our training on how to do the soil sampling and other stuff like that, how to conduct interviews and stuff like that. Yeah, I was able to learn how to measure carbon in the soil, in the trees, different type of trees, how we could use to measure carbon. And it went well until something happened and the research was cancelled. We never get back any information about what happened after then. Then another research was done in mercury contamination in people. So we're looking here. Of course, firstly, we're trained again how to conduct interviews, how to talk to people, how do you get the information from them, the correct information, and stuff like that. Yes, so from this this research, we're able to collect data and give back to SRDC, so they could make this our influence decisions about, because on our findings then we found out that a lot of the people around the mining area had mercury in their system, and was able to give an SRDC a voice make or advocacy to make out to at the national level. Right now the SRDC is doing a more detailed study on mining activities in headwaters to push for its protection outcome from that research. Yeah, on a local level, I also work with South Rupununi Conservation Group. Still ongoing now, doing the research, because we don't have a lot of information. If you Google anteater, you won't see a lot of information on anteaters. So still ongoing. Yeah, we're able to find out more about the animal, by setting camera traps, stopping people, find different stories and stuff like that. Yeah. So from this research, then I was able to find out more about what the creature is all about, where it goes, what is new to science then that people don't know, right? Yes, I'll happen different other researches, like small ones. Like for now, I work with Kayla at the Hermitage interviews on her fire project. Yes, I would say some of the things that the negative, for the positive things then, that when researchers do come or people come to start or do research and stuff like that, we're able to learn new knowledge. For me, that's where, for me, I have learned to do technology. I've learned different technology, different type of technology, data storage, how analyze reports and stuff like that using technology, building drones. So yeah, that's for me. It helped me a lot and give me confidence in myself to do other stuff. Some of the things that work well then is that like researchers or scientists come in with their own agenda, I would say. They want to only come for specific topic and then push forward, without realizing that they need to contact people first and find what's going on, as to know how about to carry out their research. Because if you just come in to say, oh, I want to do a study on plants or soil, you might have a negative impact on the people on the ground, right? And as for local researchers, we know our plans, like we know what we want to do, we know the language of the people. And so we carry through with our research in a more smooth way. There's other people, like for our foreign researchers to come and you know, you have to know the language of the people is very important, right? Sometimes we may know the same word and I make it a different way and lead the research in a different angle. That's what not we want. We want both parties to agree on what they want. Yeah, and challenge for researchers too is when they invest and train local guides or researchers, they sometimes left to go to do other stuff and left the researcher hanging, right? And then the return to the council again to try to find somebody to help them with their research. Yes, so when researchers come, I would say most indigenous communities, just as Gavin said, they should read up more to find where they're coming to, especially the language. Like if you know more about the people you're coming to, the culture, their customary laws, you'll understand your research will be successful. And you'll be learning, passing skills of traditional knowledge to you, and you're learning more about us, and we learn more about you. Yeah, and sometimes local researchers are not like given time. I mean, the time frame to present back the work, and sometimes they're not properly compensating back the local researcher for their time and stuff like that. Yes, it's kind of hard because you have these local researchers doing work for you, and then they take off their time off their family and stuff like that. They don't properly. I think that's all for me. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Tessa. Yeah, when we were discussing these presentations yesterday, we were saying, like, you know, even if you speak English and the Guyanese here will know what this is, but like, so for example, in Rupununi, we use the word bad for usually it's used to mean good, but just something as simple as that, when someone says something in English and you take it for one thing, it could mean something else. So the importance of having a local researcher is not just the translation for like another language, but also even in English, sometimes what Guyanese say means something completely different. So yeah, thanks Tessa for that. We had a nice little laugh about the word bad yesterday. With this, I'm gonna hand over to our final speaker, Angel Burt.
Thanks, Kayla. Angel Burjani. I'm going to talk about some of the work that I have done with some researchers, right? The first work that I've done was with the biodiversity assessment, but with the WWF in 2 areas in our territory, right? I was called up to do work with those guys on the Pantiras, and because I was like a local mapper in my territory, that is why I was called up to do work with them. So it was like really I had a good time like working with them, and I learned a lot of things as I was working with WWF. And the other work that I did was with the SRDC, right? I conducted fire awareness in communities on researches being done in our territory, but I was not a researcher. right? But I went to communities to communicate the research findings and facilitate workshops in various villages. So out of that workshops that I conducted, we were able to come up, the villagers were able to come up with recommendations what they want to do with fire, how they intend to manage fire, how they intend to keep their ecosystem or protected from the damage of fire. So villages came up with a lot of recommendations what they intend to do from that meeting. I also was able to conduct some meetings with the wildlife in some villages as well, right? Doing a little research on what kind of game animals are being depleted in our areas, right? And I was able to come up with the villagers itself, with guidelines to manage wildlife in their area, right? And also they came up with some recommendations how they intend to do it the right way or to continue using it but in a sustainable way, right? So these plans that I mentioned also born out of the management plan that the two speakers spoke about earlier, right? These were like, whilst we were talking about the management plan, the outline management plan, for those coming behind us is the name of the management plan. It born out of that. So we started to try to move forward with those main topics that we saw. Why? Because wildlife and fire, like both of them, like are working hand in hand, because if we cannot protect our wildlife, we cannot manage our fire, right? It came out and born out of the management plan. So the SRDC saw that we need to do something very urgent about these kind of things, right? Yeah, so I also work with SRCS. I was able to go under training on safe handling of birds, the measurement of birds, the weighing of the birds, banding of birds, and locating the birds using different equipments, right? So I was like trained to do those kind of work. So I was with the Siskin, the Red Siskin survey, monitoring those conservation areas we have in our area. Why? Because the red siskin is an endangered bird we have in the South Rupununi, right? And recently, I worked with the biodiversity researchers and the SRCS again. We conducted a population estimate for the two critically endangered birds, the horay-throated spine-tail and the Rio Branco antbird. So it was like really a good experience I had, right? We never knew that we had these birds here in our area, around our area. But today, yes, we know that these birds are around here, and we're still awaiting, I think, more information on them from yeah. With the SRDC, right? I'm now working on research on the cultural heritage in and around Wapchan territory, right? Why? Because we, as the Wapchan people, saw it like we needed to really look into this here, the cultural heritage, because it is very important to know our links and attachment to land, how important these sites are to us as Wapchan people, how we care about these sites by having this great beliefs about our cultural heritage, right? So today people seeing it very important in various villages that I work with, and more other villages are calling on us, calling me to do more researches areas like those they have in and around our area. I have I have also been involved in all the nearly in all the researches that the first speaker spoke about, Gavin Winter spoke about, right? And I'm also a monitor that monitors the border. I deal with the border. Gavin deals with the forest. I deal with the border, right? So I am part of those resources that was mentioned before. Some benefits, skills that I gained through these experiences with researchers, both local and foreign, has led me to build myself maybe a better local researcher, right? So from this research, I am able now to conduct my own research in my community, right? Own small little research in my own community, right? And I can facilitate meetings, workshops. I am able to collect my own data from things that I am interested in, right? Like carrying out youths now by my own self, right? Through these interviews, Wapchan elders, so these interviewing Wapchan elders and working with foreign researchers, I got understanding and can communicate in both English and Wapchan, right? I gained the skills to be able to talk to my people in ways that can understand me. Why? Because there are people who feel that they can speak Wapishan, but the big terminologies that come in English, they will not understand it, how to put it out to their own people. They will be mixing up their own people. But I get that from time to time I work with researchers, I understand a lot of things and I can put it out to my own people in the right way. From my involvement with the red siskin and the recent bird population survey, right? I now can know to conduct my own survey, set up my own transit, my focal points, right? And I understand how data is collected following those methods that I've learned recently, right? This is something I can do in my own community. And like what I've said earlier, as long as I hold those kind of things with me, I can do my own playbacks. And then I can set up my own focal block points wherever I want it, right? In my own community. And that is what we are aiming for soon. I also gain the skills to be able to handle and use equipment necessary for these type of researches. I receive training and I'm able to share the skills with youths in my territory that I've been doing, right? Before and in recent times. I'm also given a chance to interact with people all over Rupununi and gain more in-depth understanding of how important the land and resources to us as Indigenous people. Because before, like, I didn't know how really important these resources were to us as a people, right? But gaining these kind of understanding from knowledge from researchers, right? And our knowledge, meshing everything together, people now seeing that, yes, our land is so important. Our land is priority, our resources are priority, and we need to guide and protect our resources, right? The way we are protecting it from from maybe the things that are happening today in today's world, right? Some negative experiences with researchers, right? I have here some researchers, when they come around, like they feel they can do or not need to engage Indigenous people at all, right? I mean the public at all. Some researchers come and want to do their own thing or have their own way in our land, right? They do not want to come through people and go through processes that we have, right? Some researchers who came on their own don't understand or respect our process, and sometimes take away things from our territory without even asking permission from we as the owners of those things, right? For example, taking items from sacred sites, right, without permission, which in our territory, we are not supposed to be, not even trouble those things, right? We have great respect for those kind of things. And which this has happened here because they are not coming through the right procedure. We need to seek permission from the local people, from the community, and from the South Rupununi District Council before maybe carrying away or before doing any research, right? I want to speak a little bit more about the fire that I spoke about earlier, the awareness workshops that I conducted. Through the fire studies that we went, we came up with recommendations on fire management based on the understanding of our customary management and the reality of our communities today. There are new ways of governance, and this can be a challenge when these are challenges that when councillors change, right? Because here in the South Rupununi, every 3 years, councillors change. And that is a challenge for us today, right? We did lots and lots of awarenesses of fire and customary management of fire. When is the right time to burn? What is the right time to burn, right? When is the season to do this burning, right? But when council change, they do not take over those recommendations that we started or that they started, right? And generally now, although we have customary laws here governing how to do fire burning the right way, right? We don't really have like areas for that because of the change of the council. Villages want to now place these rules as well, some of which support our customary laws, right? From these meetings that I had with the people, right? They were thinking about incorporating the customary laws of the right use of fire into village rules and regulations. But because of the pandemic, right? Because of the pandemic today, like this cannot happen. Why? Because people cannot come together to have their village general meeting to pass these recommendations or these guidelines that they came up with to become a rule, right? And this is a challenge that we are facing here today as well. Also, we have plans, right, on what to do, especially with the careless use of fire. This is really a problem today because village councils are not even putting up like on their agenda on their village general meetings to say that, yes, fire today, how to use fire, it is time to use fire now, or awaken those recommendations that they came up with. Nothing like that really. So this is a challenge as well that we are facing today, right? Also, here is work for the SRDC, the village council as well. We need to play a bigger role for continuing more meetings and sharing of our information regarding our customary management, and has worked in the past, right? For example, this is the right time to burn. We need to more educate the younger, the youth village council coming on board. They need more education, right? This is where we are feeling today, right? When is the right time to burn? But there is no village council today picking up this as a challenge, right? I mean, as to deal with these challenges. Especially to engage young people, right? Young people, to show them the right way to do burning, right? So because of today, now as I speak today, this is the right time of burning, of fire, making fire breaks, right? Making clearing up paths, burning around the mountains so the fire will not go up the mountain, burning around the forest edge, so the fire will not enter into the forest. Why? Because under the forest is still moist today, right? Still wet, and along the swamps, along the bush islands, this is the right time to burn. So these kind of things still need more like village council to educate the youths. Why? Because the youths today, right? The youths today doesn't even care about the way they burn. They feel they own the land. They feel they own the fire. So they're just using these kind of things carelessly, using the fire carelessly, not even looking at our customary laws or the way traditionally we use to burn our area, right? They don't even know the right way to do burning. We have developed a fire calendar that I distributed to various villages, right? This came out from the research, right? And we even have the seasonal calendar as well, right? So we need a lot of reminders we're needing here, right? In the research, key findings were the local managers. Local managers play an important role in our area or in our villages, right? Why I'm saying local managers, what I'm saying is that people who oversee certain areas, right? People like the local ranchers, people like who have like farming areas, people like who do a lot of fishing, people like hunters, people like who do gathering, right? These are people who are recognized by the village council to look after or oversee an area, especially on the right way of burning fire, right? But the village council need to make stands at meeting to identify these people. Why? Because the younger generation are not seeing these people important again, right? Although the local manager stressing saying that we should burn the right time or this is the way to burn, but the youths intend not to listen, right? This was part of our customary management, right? And now a lot of responsibility need to rest with the village council. But they need a fire committee, I feel, right? All villages need a fire committee to help the village council and to help the local managers to deal with fire. As I mentioned, the burning times are changing. Why? Maybe because of the climate change as well, right? Because it's a challenge today. The way we knew it years ago or in ancient times, today it is not like that. Because today, as I speak, the sun is blistering hot. You cannot even predict if it is if those forests or bush islands down there are still moist, right? Because unless you maybe try it out or test it out. So we need a lot of recognition on our local managers, right? To continue the awareness and to maybe more study on fire, maybe because of the climate change, right? In all villages. These are some recommendations for some researchers who want to work in our indigenous communities, right? First, researchers need to come to communities and discuss, communities and district council, SRDC I'm talking about, to discuss their ideas with them and to get people that they would want or need as well, right? All photos, all recordings that they gathered, right? All information should be the property of the village council and the people, the local managers and the SRDC, right? If the researcher wants to use the information, they need to seek permission first, right? And negotiate on how to use the data. And we will be given the permission, which information you can use and which information you cannot use. It must be private and which are supposed to be shared with the world, right? With the public. So they need to seek permission, right? And maybe the other researchers don't see our land or territory as our own. Why? Maybe because they come to the government, and the way the government have it, like they see it, or to the minister, they see that you're going to a private land, right? Gavin spoke about the three-phase policy, and he spoke about the way we are fighting for a recognition of land or territory. So they will not respect our traditional land. Why? Because it is not in the title. So any researcher comment, any part of our area that they want to do research, they should respect it as the Wapichan people land, or they should respect the Wapichan people as the owners of that land. I think this is all I can talk about. Maybe any other questions?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Angel. Yeah, Jay, is it okay if we're gonna take like a quick couple minutes break just to get some water, go to the bathroom, and come back for the discussion? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just going to start collating some questions together.
Hi guys, thank you for your patience. We are back, refreshed.
Great. So we got some really good questions. And maybe I'm going to suggest, because of the time, that maybe we ask one or two people just to respond on each of the questions rather than everybody responding on each question. So we can kind of take it in turns. Is that okay? Just because of the time limitations.
Yeah.
Great.
Jay, sorry, just depending on the question as well, if we need to discuss, we might mute and then answer in case. Okay.
So shall I go with the first question?
Yeah.
Yeah, so so the first question, and it was kind of said in a couple of ways by different people, was about, hold on a minute, I'm just going to find it right here. It's kind of on the lines of about co-designing research, and how do people feel about using methods that are actually developed or defined by external researchers? And have you got any experience of working with researchers to actually co-produce the methods that you end up using in the projects that you do?
All right, just one sec. Yeah.
Yes, for the 10C research, especially together with the anthropologist and his team, the team of local researchers, we developed a methodology that I think suit the people back at home. So, and I think that worked well for us as local researchers and for the people themselves. So the anthropologist didn't just come and say, oh, this is how I want to take it, but rather together we developed that methodology for us. I think that's a good approach.
And just to kind of follow on from that, Gavin, I mean, how common is it that researchers would come and suggest that you work together to develop the methods? Was that experience with the anthropologist, was that a unique experience? I mean, what's your kind of view on that?
Yes, because I think of his experience maybe with other indigenous people too, no? So he had that already in his mind or in his approach itself. I'm not sure about other researchers how they would want to approach their research.
And what's the kind of, just to follow up on this idea about co-designing research, what is the kind of approach that you think is the best way to go about doing that? Is it working with an individual researcher like was you and the anthropologist, or is it more about working with a group of people or with the village or with the SRDC in terms of developing the methodologies?
Well, I think, I don't think the research that we had to do, the anthropologist himself wasn't looking to produce a paper for himself, but for, like I said, was the case study of the CBD. So we were left on our own. So following the methodology that we had developed, kind of guided the team in doing the research on our own, actually, because he just went to 3 villages. And so for the rest of communities, we were left on our own. So following that methodology was a help for us. It was a great help. And, you know, it kind of guided that research for us. Well, part of it was done like at a leaders meeting. We gathered all the leaders from each village. So they had like fleshed out the main idea or the main parts of the research. And then as we go through the training from village to village, we were able to like complete that methodology. So as you go into communities, different villages, you will find that people saying different things and how they want to do things, even though they're one option people, right? So people have their own preference of how they think a research should be done. Yeah, so it goes in the public meetings, and from there they'd be able to advise and guide you how you should deal with individuals when you go and actually do the interview themselves.
Okay, great. I mean, as a follow-up to that, there's another question which is kind of linked to that, which is, do you think there is a disconnect between the interests of external researchers coming to do research and the actual interests of the community?
Yeah, well.
I will just pause for a second. Yes, here.
Okay, I think that question is kind of ticklish because as a people here, we might have interest in certain fields, right, that we would like to invite researchers to come into, especially, let me say, pharmaceutical companies might want to send a research somewhere, or medicinal plants. We like a study on medicinal plants in our area. But then we don't know the interest of these outside or interests. So this is something that we will have to be, we want to be careful about if we are to do researches like those.
Yeah, but the discussion as well, Jay, is that most of the time that there's a proper discussion, there's not a big disconnect, because as long as I think it's just people see that they can use that data. So for example, in wildlife data collection or monitoring something, as long as that data is given back in a way that people can use it, there's not a disconnect. But as Gavin was saying, it's just these sensitive areas. The disconnect is in the agenda then, or the intention for your research.
Okay, great. There's another question here. They're kind of, I'm trying to do them as a kind of follow-on questions. The question is as follows: the importance of two-way, the importance of a two-way flow of benefits was mentioned by, I think, all the speakers. Do you think there's value to Indigenous communities? If there's value for Indigenous communities of researchers actually sharing the findings from their previous research? So for example, in fields like archaeology or paleoecology that are sometimes difficult to study in the field, but might be of interest and use to communities. So did you quite understand what I said? I don't know if I articulated that very well, but it's kind of the idea of whether previous research or research that's not always easy to do in the field, whether people would be interested to know about that kind of work.
Just repeat that one more time, Jay, because the phone was ringing and was distracting for us.
Yeah, I suppose it goes way of that, about kind of the two-way communication and sharing information between external researchers and communities. And it's that idea that, would local communities value researchers sharing findings from their previous research in areas that might be difficult to study in the field, such as like archaeology or paleoecology, things that might be kind of, not so easy to study in the field, but maybe people would be interested to know about that. How useful would it be?
Yeah, answer it?
Yeah.
We had one, I think, a researcher came in. So at a general meeting, he shared his experience with other people that he studied in French Guyana, Suriname, I think. So directly the interest of his research or the field that he's in, people started to say, hey, you can come study or go dig here or check there, and using other research paper as well, he was able to do something for the villages back home.
So I suppose it's that. I think the questioner was probably trying to ask, the value of kind of just sharing research more broadly. So even though they might be coming, say for example, someone's coming to do some research in the communities, but they have experience of other types of research, maybe it would be useful to communicate that with communities, because people would be interested to learn about other studies, things that have been done in other places, things like that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, great. Okay. One of the questions we have from Ollie Wilson is, it says, Angel mentioned linking back to ancient systems of land use. Do you have any thoughts on research that works with Indigenous communities to understand ancient land use? Are there particular difficulties with linking present day to past? Is it useful for communities?
But pause 1 sec.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing that a lot of our knowledge holders are already gone today, right? So I think there's a need of a lot of or more researches to be done in this field, right? Or we can also learn from outside, right? Find and learn how they do things down here, and we can learn from them as well, because we need to bring our youths on board today to really understand how it was in ancient times, right? And we need to get them on board to understand. Maybe we can learn from people from outside as well. Okay?
So sharing experience of other indigenous peoples in other parts as well. So also we talked about maybe mix and matching kind of different types of research. So for those people that are still around that have this knowledge passed down, doing interviews, but also doing maybe coupling with things like archaeology or paleoecology to understand a little bit about past use as well. Sorry, I'm a mouth. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Kayla, it wasn't totally clear to me, but yeah, I suppose that question is kind of related more maybe to the paleoecology kind of work, you know, and the relevance of that kind of paleoecology work to communities, you know, how do they feel about these kinds of studies that are about not just the past in terms of your kind of memories, but even further back, you know, like that kind of timescales. What do they feel about that kind of work? And how relevant and useful is it to them today?
One second.
Yeah, because the management plan, right? We decide that we need to see how it was done in the past, and that is the only way like we can move things forward into the future, right? Because without seeing how it was done in the past, we cannot move things forward into the future, right?
Okay, great. We have a question here about, it kind of goes back to issues to do with when data's already been collected or things are already been starting to be published. So someone's asking here that sometimes some Indigenous researchers that work with scientists might not have access to email or any other kind of internet access. How would you suggest that we as scientists make sure that people are properly acknowledged in the research that they publish?
All right. More of a hard copy. Every paper you produce, a hard copy to the back to the community, like to an umbrella organization, like for example, the SRDC, or the ministry you work with, and the research, the local research will be a co-author.
Okay. Also, I think maybe in the context of that question, I think they were also thinking about sometimes, for example, you know, a researcher might come to do some work in the community, work with certain researchers, and then they might go back. But because that community may not have good internet access, or the researchers themselves may not have, or the community members might not have emails, for example, sometimes the people might find it difficult to communicate again after they've maybe gone back to wherever they've come from. And so I suppose, what would you suggest in that case? Is there a process that people have to do before leaving, that so that in case they can't communicate later on, in terms of, you know, how do they make the acknowledgements to those people? So I think it's that in that context where potentially they can't then communicate with those people afterwards. What do you do?
I think you could agree more on a validation meeting.
Sorry, can you repeat that, Tessa?
Said, I think it happened in the validation meeting. Both parties agreed in the validation meeting.
And what do you mean by the validation meeting? Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. After gathering your findings, you know, before you finalize your book or your paper, in a situation like that, before you leave the community, you can gather the leaders, elders, whoever, youths, and make reference to whoever, you know, who contributed. You acknowledge them there and say that I will put X, Y in this paper. And, you know, you give credit to each people or each person who helped with that paper. So your findings will on the spot there then be validated before you leave that community, rather than you leaving and then you'll take 3 years to come back to validate that.
Yeah. Okay, great. So another question that we had quite early on was about data storage. And, you know, I know this from my own experience in that, you know, sometimes like I come to the Rupununi, collect the data, you know, but who's actually storing the data? Who's actually got the data, you know? And this has always been an issue, and it's not necessarily because people didn't want to give the data, which maybe has been the case sometimes, but also could be that maybe there weren't facilities available for communities to store the data. So I just wonder if you have any views on about data storage. You know, obviously, how do you view data storage? Are these things improving in the communities, that they have ways of keeping that data? Yeah, any comments? So someone asked about how do you store and protect data, especially when it's traditional knowledge data?
So I'm going to summarize what was discussed, and then these guys will add. So it's a little tricky question because there's levels of data, I suppose, in terms of sensitivity. So the SRDC itself, like the monitoring data that it has about the land they do have for storage systems. They have hard drives and they do have backups in the clouds and so now. But for more remote areas and information or data collected on traditional knowledge, that might be a little bit harder. So some of the suggestions that came out was looking to patent or protect that knowledge through that research that was done. And another discussion we had was maybe if that community has a trusted partner it works with that can protect some of that data, it could be the researcher themselves, until things do get better, improved in communities to store their own data, which I think the SRDC is aiming for at the umbrella level and at the village level.
Great. We have one or two other, I know we're nearly running out of time, but just I hope you'd be happy just to take one or two last questions. One of the questions is about the format of sharing research. I know somebody mentioned, Tessa mentioned before about, it would be good to send a hard copy, especially in that context that we talked about. But is there any preferred ways that you would like to have data shared?
Yeah, modded data share, right? Ideal for us here is like to big data and public interest, but due to the pandemic, the deal us here, it's kind of hard, right? So
I can't hear you very clearly. You need to come forward a little bit, or yeah.
Yes, for the data sharing, I was saying, right? Ideally for us here is like to have public meetings, right? To hold public meetings to share back, to give back information But due to the pandemic that we're facing today, right, we'll rely on maybe our radios. We have radios to share information with, and maybe our WebChan webpage, right? SRDC webpage, we can use that, and maybe back to the schools, like using brochures, or into the villages, right? Giving back information to the persons that we get information from, right? Those are like areas we can use to pass on back our information.
So I think the key message was like in varying formats would be helpful. Like you get the end result of your research, be it like your PhD thesis or a paper, that would be also welcome, but also presented back in different ways. Something maybe audio through something like a radio program, summarized sort of brochures or presentations, but ideally in person if it could happen, not just the public meeting, but also sharing back, as Gavin was saying, and discuss it to the groups you work with. So the different managers or the different people you work with.
Great. Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up because I know there's people who also have meetings coming up at our time, 5 o'clock. So I just thought, Kayla, it would be quite useful maybe just to kind of obviously thank everybody, but also maybe you could just say what we aim to do from this webinar, because it's not just a webinar for the sake of a webinar. So yeah, that would be really nice so that everybody has an understanding of what we're planning from this webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you to everyone who came to listen, and thank you to Gavin, Tessa, and Angel for making the journey out to Latam as well. They're all heading back this afternoon, so hopefully, well, they will have a safe journey back. So from this webinar, I think there are 3 things that we aim to do. So we have the recording, which is going to be shared with persons who were interested in it but could not attend. And I think we promised as well that we would share this with the relevant organizations like the SRDC and the SRCS that have participated here today. We also aim to do like a little report that like recommendations that came out of this discussion that could be given to Diversity and to SRDC to create those kind of guidelines that we discussed today. And thirdly, we're hoping to submit an article about this to the pages with these guys as co-authors. Better say that.
Great. So yeah, I think on that note, I'm probably going to close the meeting. Does anyone, Tessa, Gavin, Angel, do you have any final remarks before we close the meeting?
Sure. Just want to say thank you as well for hosting us and inviting us to this webinar. This is my first webinar, maybe, since the pandemic introduced webinars. Our management plan is a document that we are hoping still to continue working on. So we will always welcome researchers who can contribute, like Kayla in her fire study now. We are doing watershed management. So anyone with that kind of experience or wanting to assist the optioners would definitely be welcome to come and do research and help us to protect our lands. So this meeting is an interesting one for me, and I'm sure that from here we will look forward to meeting other interested researchers in different fields as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Gavin.
For me, I'd like to thank you and everybody for accommodating me here. I think from this meeting we had a great discussion, I could say, and I think we can move forward as well, because my dream is like to safeguard and protect my territory as a whole, and by this kind of meetings, I think we can have partner with a lot of organizations I think I can mention like Kayla, right? And many others that will be welcome to our territory to help the watch. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, Angel.
All right, thank you, Jade. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Tessa, as well. Sorry, Kayla.
No, it's okay.
All right, thank you, everyone. Yes, as everybody said, it was a great webinar for us too. Yes, from here we could able like get discussion of about yes, researchers are interested to come out to help go forward. That we watching people fight against their land.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess the lesson is any type of research that also like supports local efforts is really useful.
Great. All right. Well, have a safe journey back home, everybody. And thank you very much. And thank you everyone who participated today for your questions and for your patience, especially at the start. Obviously, I will edit out that part in the recording. But yeah, thanks everybody. And yeah, we will be sharing those outputs that Kayla mentioned. So you'll hopefully get access to those. If not, you have Kayla's email and you can contact her for those once we get those out. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye. Bye.